And now I'd like to introduce Kimberly Sullivan, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA coordinator for the Atlantic Shores North project with BOEM. Kimberly?
Hi, thank you, Pam. Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Sullivan, and I am honored to be here as the environmental coordinator for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, also referred to as BOEM, review of the proposed Atlantic Shores North offshore wind project. I will be talking about the National Environmental Policy Act, or the NEPA process. BOEM's approach to the analysis of the construction and operations plan, also referred to as a COP, and how you can provide input into the process. Next slide, please. Atlantic Shores submitted their initial COP for the Atlantic Shores North project on April 29, 2022. The most recent version of the COP was received on March 1st, 2024, and is posted on the BOEM's Atlantic Shores North project webpage. The COP is the focus of the environmental review. At the conclusion of the NEPA process for the Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS, a decision to approve, disapprove, or approve with modifications the COP proposal through an issuance of a record of decision, or a ROD. Next slide, please. BOEM uses a multi-phased approach to grant access to the ocean areas that may be suitable for wind development. This colorful figure here describes the phases and the amount of time each step generally takes to lease, review, approve, and construct an offshore wind facility on the Outer Continental Shelf, or OCS. The process begins with the identification of potential areas for wind development. This is indicated by everything before the blue ribbon, which Kirby just described. Following the completion of the leasing phase, surveys are done to determine if the leased area is suitable for wind farm construction and to identify what physical, cultural, and natural resources are present within the lease area. These surveys serve as the backbone of knowledge and aid in the development of the construction and operations plan. One thing to remember is that the COP is a project proposal. It is not a decision document. Following the completion of surveys and the submission of a COP, BOEM conducts a review of the plan and decides if it's sufficient to begin the NEPA process. This orange stage of the process is where we are today. Next slide, please. The National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, is the law that requires federal agencies to assess the environmental effects of their proposed actions and reasonable alternatives to the proposed action prior to making a decision. Again, the construction operations plan proposal is the focus of the environmental review. We are at the plan approval process for the Atlantic Shores North project. The environmental impact statement will include both onshore and offshore components. Next slide, please. The environmental review for the COP is a multi-step process that involves two key opportunities for public input. We are in the middle of the first opportunity now, the scoping period. This diagram shows the environmental impact statement process, and it's anticipated to take about 2 years from start to finish. The Atlantic Shores North project's NEPA process, which is required before BOEM can approve the COP, formally began at the issuance of the Notice of Intent, which was on March 18th, 2024. This was the beginning of your first opportunity to provide input on the construction and operations proposal. The 45-day public scoping period will conclude on May 2nd, 2024. Following the conclusion of the scoping period, BOEM, in coordination with our cooperating agencies, will begin the development of the DEIS. Once the DEIS has been completed, a Notice of Availability, or an NOA, will be posted in the Federal Register, and this will begin your second opportunity for input. During this 45-day public review and comment period, several public meetings will be held for the public to provide input on the DEIS, and written comments will also be collected. At the conclusion of the DEIS review period, BOEM and the cooperating agencies will address comments received from the public and will begin writing the final EIS. Following the conclusion of the final EIS, a Notice of Availability will be issued in the Federal Register. A record of decision will be issued no sooner than 30 days following the Notice of Availability of the final EIS. Next slide, please. The Notice of Intent can be found at regulations.gov by searching for docket number BOEM TAC 2024, TAC 0008. You can also get it from BOEM's Atlantic Shores North project page. All comments submitted through the environmental review will be posted to this docket within regulations.gov and available for you to review shortly after the close of the comment period. Next slide, please. An environmental impact statement is a NEPA document meant to provide information to the public and federal government decision makers on the proposed action, alternative to the proposed action, and an analysis and disclosure of potential environmental impacts. The NEPA process is also commonly referred to as the environmental review. Impacts identified during the environmental review may either be beneficial or adverse. For example, the route the transmission line could take to reach the substation of the wind farm, or how much distance between each wind turbine could be an alternatives to the proposed action. The environmental impact statement will include a no-action alternative. Selection of the no-action alternative would result in BOEM's disapproval of the construction and operations plan submitted by Atlantic Shores. If this alternative is selected, it does not mean that the wind farm would never be constructed in the lease area. It means the specific construction and operation plan proposal BOEM is considering would not be approved. The environmental impact statement would include reasonably foreseeable environmental trends and planned actions for those other than those presented in the construction and operations plan proposal. Next slide, please. The environmental impact statement is a comprehensive look at the biological, physical, and socioeconomic impacts that may occur during the proposed construction, operation, and decommissioning of the wind farm. A few examples of biological resources are marine mammals and sea turtles. Examples of physical resources are air and water quality, and examples of socioeconomic resources are commercial and recreational fishing and cultural resources. Next slide, please. BOEM allows the lessee the option to submit a reasonable range of design parameters within its construction and operations plan. This is called a project design envelope, or a PDE. The PDE model is based off the Rodel envelope used in the United Kingdom for offshore wind projects. The BOEM draft design envelope guidance was issued in 2018 and describes how developers may use the envelope when designing their projects. Some examples of activities developers may use a PDE for are different wind turbine foundations, size and number, export cable routes and landfall number of offshore substations, and things such as this. Next slide, please. Just as described, a PDE is a permitting approach that allows the lessee the option to submit a reasonable range of design parameters with its construction and operations plan. Under these conditions, BOEM's environmental review would apply to the upper limit of each design parameter to ensure the resources are being analyzed for the greatest potential impact. An example of this for marine mammals would be the use of a monopile foundation, as it is more impactful to marine mammals because of the noise generated from pile driving. This is not the case for a benthic habitat. The worst case for benthic habitat would be a gravity-based foundation. The PDE allows for the analysis of the most impactful case for each resource. The PDE approach allows BOEM to continue the environmental review process without having to pause and restart as the project is refined into the final design. A change to the project design parameter could be a change in a wind turbine height. In this example, BOEM would analyze the impacts on each resource that would occur using the maximum potential height of the wind turbine to be installed. If Atlantic Shores chooses to construct wind turbines below that maximum height, the impacts would be less than those analyzed in the COP's environmental impact statement. As an important note, revisions outside of the design envelope would require additional review and consultation. Next slide, please. The environmental review will run concurrently with consultations. The NEPA process serves as an umbrella planning tool that encompasses the related consultation processes. The consultations conducted under this EIS include Section 106 under the National Historic Preservation Act, the Coastal Zone Management Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammals Protection Act, the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation and Management Act, which is EFH, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Though BOEM does review for compliance with MBTA, there is no actual formal consultation required under this consultation. Next slide, please. BOEM has invited multiple tribes, federal and state agencies to participate as cooperating or participating agencies through NEPA or through the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, Title 41, also known as the FAST 41 process. Next slide, please. BOEM is implementing an option called NEPA substitution for the Section 106 review, mainly due to the lessons learned from the earliest COP consultations and the prioritization of stakeholder needs. This process provides a streamlined approach that better integrates the National Historic Preservation Act and NEPA reviews both thematically and in terms of schedule. It also provides the lessee a clearer expectation of the environmental review timelines and the cost associated with the mitigations. Using this process that will provide consulting parties and stakeholders earlier and more direct input into the selection of alternatives and mitigation measures. The NEPA substitution approach will also help BOEM to engage with tribes more effectively and facilitate an increased focus on government-to-government consultations. Next slide, please. This diagram shows how the major National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 process milestones that are highlighted here in blue are integrated into the NEPA process. An example of early engagement can be seen with step 1, which is the initiation of the Section 106 process at the time of the Notice of Intent publication. Next slide, please. Through this process, BOEM is now seeking comment input regarding the identification of historic properties and/or potential effects to historic properties from activities associated with the approval of the Atlantic Shores North COP, reasonable alternatives, for example, size, geographic area, or other restrictions on construction and siting of facilities or activities, and the potential mitigation measures to be analyzed in the EIS, including ways to avoid, minimize, or otherwise treat and resolve adverse effects on historic properties. Next slide, please. The draft environmental impact statement is currently scheduled for release in about a year from now, in the summer of 2025. At that time, a Federal Register Notice of Availability will begin a 45-day public review and comment period. During this time, several public meetings will be held. The 45-day public review will provide you with a second opportunity to provide input into the NEPA process for the Atlantic Shores North COP proposal. The final environmental impact statement is currently scheduled for the release in spring of 2026, or about 2 years from now. A Federal Register Notice of Availability will be released at that time. Late summer of 2026 is when BOEM anticipates concluding all consultations for the Atlantic Shores North EIS, and then the publication of the Record of Decision. Next slide, please. This slide shares some information about BOEM's Environmental Studies program. This robust program develops, funds, and manages rigorous scientific research specifically to inform policy decisions on the development of energy and mineral resources on the OCS. For more information, please see BOEM's webpage. Next slide, please. As I have previously mentioned, the scoping period is your first opportunity to provide input and is an important stage in the Environmental Policy Act process. Public comments submitted during the scoping period provide valuable local expertise and perspective that aids BOEM in the decision-making process. Public input, such as raising significant issues, sharing of information sources BOEM may not have considered, and recommendation of reasonable alternatives are critical inputs to the development of well-informed draft environmental impact statement. Please note, all comments must be received no later than May 2nd, 2024 for consideration. Next slide, please. Today's scoping meeting is the last of 2 virtual meetings and 3 in-person meetings. All virtual meetings are being recorded and will be made available to the public. The information provided in the meetings is the same for all scoping meetings, regardless if they are in person or virtual. I encourage you to go to the virtual meeting room website on BOEM Atlantic Shores North project page and find additional information and resources on the proposals such as fact sheets, project posters, and meeting information. Directions on how to provide formal comments can also be found on the website. Please be sure to scroll down on the virtual meeting room page to see the thumbnails of each poster and handout. Next slide, please. As I just mentioned, there were 3 in-person meetings held last week. And at these meetings, we did encourage everyone to go to the virtual meeting room on the website as well to see additional information. Next slide, please. There are 3 ways you can provide input during the scoping period. The preferred option is for you to submit your comments online through regulations.gov. You could also provide comments during this meeting by raising your hand within the Zoom platform during the upcoming public comment listening session portion of this meeting. You may also submit your comments in writing and mail to the address listed on the slide. Also, please see the How to Comment poster on BOEM's project website for more information. Next slide. Thank you for your time and listening today. My contact information is here on the slide, along with the links to the website for more information. And with that, I will turn it back to Pam.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation, Kimberly.